I don't believe in balance, Lucian Graves said quietly, his voice steady over the low hum of the portable generators. I believe in power. The words drifted across the clearing like a vow as floodlights washed the ancient trees in sterile white, turning the black hollow forest into something that looked less like sacred ground and more like a construction site waiting for permission. 3 black SUVs idled 30 yards away, their engines ticking in the cool night air, while men in tailored coats studied digital maps projected across a folding aluminum table. Beyond them, the woods stretched for miles, dense, silent, older than any city on the eastern seaboard. Beneath that soil, nearly 40 feet down according to the preliminary scans, pulsed the anomaly they had come to claim, the core. To the investors from Boston and New York, it was an untapped energy source that could redefine grids and markets. To Lucian, it was leverage. He stood tall in a charcoal overcoat, hands clasped behind his back, silver cufflinks catching the artificial light. His features were sharp, controlled, the kind of face that inspired loyalty at council meetings and silence in training yards. Your data suggests volatility, one investor said, adjusting his glasses. If we drill without full stabilization, we could destabilize the entire zone. Lucian's gaze lifted toward the dark canopy overhead, where the moon hung pale and distant. Your scientists worry about risk, he replied. My people have lived beside this energy for centuries. It responds to strength. He did not mention the fractures already splitting his own kind. He did not mention the Alpha King. Adrian Blackwood still believed in treaties signed 30 years ago after the war, still spoke of coexistence and restraint as if the world had not changed. Adrian, with his measured tone and silver eyes that carried too much humanity for some of the elders' comfort. Half human, they whispered. Half compromise. Lucian stepped closer to the table, studying the holographic rendering of the underground cavern that glowed in shades of blue and gold. At its center, a concentrated sphere of light pulsed like a heartbeat. You will have access, Lucian said. In exchange, I want infrastructure, influence, protection. The men exchanged glances. And the Alpha King? Another asked carefully. Lucian allowed himself the faintest smile. He values peace. I value survival. A breeze swept through the clearing, bending the tops of the trees in a slow, uneasy wave. Somewhere deeper in the forest, a single wolf's call echoed and faded. Lucian did not turn toward it. Instead, he extended his hand. The investor hesitated only a fraction of a second before shaking it. The deal was sealed without raised voices, without threats, without any visible sign of force, just signatures on encrypted tablets and a shared understanding that the ancient balance was no longer sacred. As the SUVs pulled away and the generators powered down, darkness reclaimed the clearing inch by inch. Lucian remained alone for a moment, staring into the woods that had once felt eternal. Adapt, he murmured to himself, or be erased. Far above, the moon slipped behind a bank of slow-moving clouds, and deep beneath the forest floor, the core pulsed again, stronger this time, as if it had heard him. Dr. Clara Whitmore had learned to trust numbers more than instincts, but the readings on her monitor refused to behave like anything she had studied in graduate school. The portable seismograph trembled across the folding lab table inside her research trailer, its thin needle tracing irregular spikes every few seconds. 42 feet below the forest floor, directly beneath the restricted zone marked on her satellite map, something was generating a consistent pulse that did not match geothermal activity, did not match tectonic friction, and certainly did not match any approved energy grid within 200 miles. She leaned closer to the screen, brushing a strand of pale blonde hair behind her ear, blue eyes narrowed in focus. The coordinates were the same ones her father had circled in red ink 15 years ago in a leather-bound journal she had found hidden in the attic after his disappearance. Black Hollow. Core anomaly. Do not drill. At the time, she had been a senior in high school, too young to understand why a respected environmental physicist would abruptly withdraw his findings from a federal committee and then vanish 3 weeks later without explanation. The official report had labeled it a hiking accident. No body recovered. Case closed. Clara had never believed that version. Now, as the digital map rendered a three-dimensional image of a cavern glowing in layered gold beneath the trees, her heartbeat synced with the rhythm of the anomaly itself. Every 9 seconds, the core pulsed with measurable output strong enough to power a small town for days. Investors would call it revolutionary. Government agencies would call it strategic. Her father had called it sacred in a margin note written in careful block letters. Sacred from what? She wondered, or sacred to whom? Outside the trailer, the forest was unusually quiet for late summer in upstate New York. No crickets, no distant owls, just wind moving slowly through branches as if the trees were listening. Clara stepped out onto the gravel clearing, tablet in hand, and scanned the perimeter fence her team had installed earlier that week. Yellow warning signs fluttered under the security lights, each one reading restricted research area, authorized personnel only. She had filed the permits through a private energy consortium based in Chicago, careful to list the project as a renewable feasibility study. She had not listed the name Black Hollow in the official documentation. Some part of her had resisted turning her father's final coordinates into a corporate asset. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. An email notification from the consortium board flashed across the screen. Subject line, Timeline Acceleration Request. They wanted preliminary extraction models within 30 days. Clara exhaled slowly, glancing toward the tree line where shadows thickened beyond the artificial glow of her equipment. What were you trying to protect? She whispered into the night, as if the forest might answer. She did not see the figure standing 100 yards away between two old oaks, watching the trailer lights reflect off her white lab coat. Silver eyes observed in silence, unreadable, calculating, as the pulse beneath the earth grew stronger and the fragile line between discovery and disruption thinned by the second. Adrian Blackwood had been standing in the same place for nearly an hour, though to anyone watching from a distance he might have appeared carved from the forest itself. The night air carried the faint metallic scent of machinery and human ambition, drifting through the pines like an unwelcome guest. From where he stood, just beyond the reach of Clara Whitmore's security lights, he could see the glow of her research trailer cutting a sharp rectangle into the darkness. He had read the reports 2 days earlier, delivered by scouts who moved unseen through the outer boundaries of Black Hollow. Unauthorized equipment, seismic instruments, private investors. The old treaty had not been formally broken, but it had been nudged, tested, strained like a rope, pulled 1 inch too far. Behind him, the forest shifted softly as another presence approached. They have fenced the southern ridge, one of his council guards said quietly. Temporary barriers. Motion sensors. They claim it is scientific research. Adrian did not turn. His silver eyes remained fixed on the illuminated clearing. It is never just research, he replied, his voice calm, but edged with something heavier. He felt the core beneath his feet, the pulse resonating through soil and stone into bone. Every 9 seconds. Stronger than it had been in years. The elders would call it an omen. The extremists within the pack would call it opportunity. He closed his eyes briefly and saw flashes of memory that did not belong entirely to him. His mother's human hands resting against the bark of these same trees, her laughter soft and unafraid before the war drew lines through everything. He had been young when she died during the last conflict, young enough to remember warmth, but old enough to remember the blame. Half-blood, compromise, weakness disguised as mercy. The council had tolerated him because he had united the territories and enforced 30 years of fragile peace. But peace required restraint, and restraint was beginning to look like vulnerability. Lucian has been absent from the eastern patrols, the guard added. He claims negotiation with outside contacts. Adrian's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Lucian Graves had stood at his right hand for over a decade, a strategist who understood both tradition and power. Yet something in recent months had shifted, subtle but undeniable. Continue observing, Adrian said. No interference tonight. He stepped forward, boots silent against pine needles, closing the distance to the edge of the clearing until he stood exactly 100 yards from Clara's trailer. Through the open door he could see her silhouette moving across the glow of computer screens, focused, determined, unaware of the eyes that studied her. She did not look like a threat. She looked like someone searching for answers. The core pulsed again beneath them, and for a brief, impossible second, Adrian felt the energy rise between them like a thread connecting two separate worlds. If she drilled, the balance would fracture. If he acted too soon, the council would see confirmation of their fears about his human instincts. Above them, clouds thinned and the moon reappeared, casting silver light across gravel and bark alike. Adrian exhaled slowly, the sound barely more than a whisper carried into the trees. "Not yet," he murmured, though whether he spoke to the forest, to the core, or to himself, even he was not certain. The next morning arrived wrapped in a pale gray mist that clung low to the forest floor, turning Black Hollow into something almost suspended in time. Clara Whitmore had slept less than 3 hours, her mind replaying the rhythmic pulse of the anomaly beneath the earth. By 7:30 in the morning, she stood outside the trailer with a stainless steel travel mug in hand, watching condensation drift from the tops of the trees as sunlight tried to push through. Her team would not arrive until 9, which meant the forest belonged to her alone for a brief, fragile window. She walked the perimeter fence again, boots crunching softly over gravel, tablet balanced against her forearm. The readings had intensified overnight. Not dramatically, but enough to suggest escalation. 42 feet below ground, the core was emitting energy levels that exceeded her initial projections by nearly 12%. That was not a rounding error. That was a pattern. She paused near the southern ridge, where the tree line thickened and the shadows seemed slower to lift. The air felt different here, heavier somehow, as if pressure built beneath the soil. Clara crouched and pressed her palm against the ground, not because she expected to feel anything, but because the impulse surprised her. For a fleeting second, warmth traveled through her fingertips, subtle yet undeniable, like the faint vibration of a subway passing beneath city pavement. She pulled her hand back quickly, unsettled by the intimacy of the sensation. Behind her, a branch shifted. Clara straightened at once, heart rate climbing as she turned toward the sound. About 30 yards beyond the fence, between 2 tall oaks, a man stood in full daylight. He was not dressed like a hiker or a surveyor. He wore a dark coat that fell cleanly along his frame, posture upright, expression composed. His hair was dark, his features sharply defined, and his eyes, even from this distance, caught the light in a way that felt deliberate. Silver. Clara's breath stalled for half a beat. She had not heard footsteps, had not seen him approach. "This is restricted property," she called out, steadying her voice. "If you are looking for directions, the nearest trailhead is 5 miles west." He did not step forward. He did not retreat. He simply regarded her, as if weighing something invisible between them. "You are studying what lies beneath this forest," he said at last, his voice carrying easily across the space without being raised. It was calm, controlled, unmistakably American in cadence yet edged with something older. Clara tightened her grip on the tablet. "And you are trespassing." A faint shift of expression crossed his face, not quite amusement, not quite challenge. "You believe it is yours to measure," he continued, ignoring her warning. "But you do not yet understand what you are measuring." The words landed with a weight she did not expect. Clara felt irritation spark beneath her composure. "I understand data," she replied. "And data does not respond to mythology." The breeze moved again, lifting strands of her hair across her face as the mist thinned further. The man's gaze dropped briefly to the ground between them, as if sensing the same pulse she had felt moments earlier. When he looked back at her, something in his eyes had shifted, sharpened. "You are closer to a fracture than you realize, Dr. Whitmore," he said quietly. Hearing her name from a stranger sent a ripple of unease down her spine. "Who are you?" she demanded. He held her stare for one long, unbroken second before answering. "The one who will be forced to respond if you continue." And with that, he stepped back into the tree line, disappearing so seamlessly into the forest that it was as if he had never been there at all. Clara Whitmore remained standing at the edge of the fence long after the stranger vanished into the trees, her pulse still elevated as if her body had recognized a threat her mind could not categorize. By the time her research team arrived at 9 o'clock sharp, 2 pickup trucks crunching across the gravel with coffee cups balanced on dashboards, she had already replayed the encounter a dozen times in her head. She did not mention him immediately. Instead, she returned to data, to charts and graphs that obeyed logic. Inside the trailer, monitors displayed a steady escalation in the core's output, now nearly 15% above baseline projections. That spike happened around 6:30 this morning, her lead technician, Mark Reynolds, said, adjusting the resolution on the seismic feed. There was no drilling. No external interference. It just climbed. Clara folded her arms, eyes fixed on the pulsing model beneath the digital terrain map. 6:30. The same time she had felt the warmth through the soil. The same time he had appeared. Coincidence was still the most rational explanation, she told herself. Run a correlation between surface vibration and atmospheric pressure shifts, she instructed. And double-check the southern ridge sensors. I want confirmation that nothing crossed the perimeter. Mark hesitated slightly. We already reviewed the footage. No one triggered the cameras. Clara said nothing. Cameras did not capture everything. By noon, the consortium board had scheduled an emergency video call. Their faces filled her laptop screen in crisp high definition from offices in Chicago and Manhattan, polished glass and skyline views behind them. We have reviewed your overnight data, the chairwoman said, fingers steepled beneath her chin. This is larger than anticipated. Our investors are prepared to accelerate Phase 1 extraction. We are talking about mobilizing within 2 weeks. Clara felt the weight of the timeline press against her ribs. We do not yet understand the stability threshold, she replied evenly. If we destabilize the cavern without modeling long-term effects, we could trigger subsidence across several square miles. There are communities within a 20-mile radius. A pause followed, then a measured response. Dr. Whitmore, innovation carries calculated risk. The call ended with no final decision, only the promise of further review. Clara closed the laptop and stepped outside for air. The mist had burned away, leaving clear blue sky stretched over miles of unbroken forest. It looked peaceful from the surface. Timeless. She walked again toward the southern ridge, this time without the tablet, without instruments, guided by something quieter. The trees seemed closer here, shadows deeper even in full daylight. You said you would respond, she called softly into the stillness, unsure why she expected an answer. For a moment there was only wind. Then a figure emerged from between two trunks as if he had always been there. He stopped exactly 20 yards from the fence, close enough now that she could see the tension in his jaw, the deliberate control in his posture. Of something almost like respect passed through his expression. What you intend to extract is not a resource, he said. It is a foundation. The ground beneath them pulsed again, subtle but unmistakable, as if echoing his words. Clara held her ground. Then explain it, she challenged. If you expect me to stop, give me a reason grounded in fact. He studied her in silence for several long seconds, as though weighing not just her question, but her resolve. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a quiet gravity that felt less like a threat and more like a boundary drawn in stone. If you continue, he said, you will not be negotiating with investors. You will be negotiating with me. The silence between them stretched thin as wire, broken only by the steady 9-second pulse beneath the soil. Clara Whitmore did not step back from the fence. She did not look away. You speak as if you own this land, she said, keeping her tone level even as her mind raced through variables she could not quantify. The man regarded her with an intensity that felt less like arrogance and more like obligation. Ownership is a human concept, he replied. Stewardship is not. The word lingered in the air. Clara felt frustration spark in her chest. You still have not explained anything, she pressed. If there is structural instability, show me the data. If there is environmental risk, present the models. I respond to evidence. A faint shift crossed his expression at that, something almost reflective. And if the evidence predates your instruments? He asked quietly. If the foundation you measure is not geological, but biological? The breeze strengthened briefly, bending the tops of the trees in a slow arc. Clara caught the subtle vibration again through the soles of her boots. That is not possible, she said automatically, though her certainty felt thinner than it had an hour ago. Energy does not respond to presence. His silver eyes held hers. It responds to lineage. The statement unsettled her more than she wanted to admit. Before she could challenge him further, her phone vibrated sharply in her pocket. The screen flashed with an alert from the Southern Ridge sensors. Unauthorized internal access attempt. Clara's breath caught. That is impossible, she muttered, glancing toward the research trailer nearly 100 yards behind her. The perimeter cameras had shown no breach. Yet the internal system log displayed a manual override request originating from within the secured network. She looked back at the man. He had not moved. Your equipment is being accessed, he said evenly. By someone who does not answer to you. Clara's pulse spiked. That is a bold accusation for someone standing outside my fence. I do not require your fence, he replied. But others do. The implication landed heavily. Clara turned and jogged back toward the trailer, gravel scattering beneath her boots. She reached the door in seconds and pulled up the network dashboard. A secondary user had initiated a remote synchronization with an external server based in Chicago. Extraction simulations were being uploaded in real time. Mark Reynolds stood frozen beside the console. I did not authorize this, he said, voice tight. The board must have triggered a direct line. Clara's jaw tightened. Acceleration was no longer a suggestion. It was already in motion. She stepped back outside, scanning the tree line. The man was still there, watching, not with triumph, but with something closer to warning. Who are you? She demanded again, louder now. For the first time, he answered without hesitation. Adrian Blackwood, he said. The name settled into her memory with quiet force. And if your investors continue, he added, voice steady but edged with resolve, the response will not be limited to legal negotiations. The core pulsed again beneath them, stronger, as if reacting to the invisible lines being drawn above it. Clara felt the fragile framework of her project shifting from research into something far more complicated. Then perhaps, she said slowly, meeting his gaze across the fence, we both have a problem. Adrian held her stare for a long moment, and for the first time since she had seen him, she sensed not just authority but conflict, as if whatever choice came next would cost him more than she yet understood. The air shifted before the sound arrived. Clara felt it first as a subtle tightening across her shoulders, as if the forest itself had drawn a careful breath. Adrian Blackwood did not look away from her, but something in his posture sharpened, attention turning inward and outward at the same time. You are not the only one who accelerated plans, he said quietly. Clara glanced back toward the trailer where Mark was still scanning the network logs. If this is about corporate pressure, I can handle it, she replied. I have dealt with boards before. Adrian's gaze moved past her to the ridge beyond the fence. This is not corporate. The next pulse from beneath the ground came stronger than the others. The gravel at Clara's feet trembled lightly, enough to rattle a loose bolt against the metal fencing. Inside the trailer, an alarm chimed, sharp and insistent. Mark's voice carried through the open door. Clara, the output just jumped another 10%. That is not normal. She turned halfway, torn between the data and the man standing 20 yards away. You said others do not answer to me, she said quickly. Who? Adrian hesitated, and in that brief pause she saw conflict deepen across his features. Lucian Graves, he said at last. The name meant nothing to her, but the weight behind it did. He has been speaking with your investors, Adrian continued. Not as an ally to you. As an ally to opportunity. Clara's mind connected fragments at once. The remote synchronization. The sudden timeline acceleration. The internal override attempt. You are suggesting someone from your world is coordinating with mine, she said slowly. To push extraction forward. I am stating it, Adrian corrected, voice controlled but edged. And he does not intend to preserve what lies beneath this forest. He intends to use it. A low vibration rolled through the clearing, deeper than before. The portable floodlights flickered for half a second. Clara felt her rational framework strain under the accumulating evidence. If this Lucian is acting without your authority, she pressed, then why are you standing outside my fence instead of stopping him? Adrian's jaw tightened. Because if I move openly against him without proof, I fracture my own counsel. And if you continue drilling without understanding, you fracture something far older. The words settled heavily between them. From the ridge, a dark SUV appeared at the edge of the tree line, engine idling low as if testing how close it could approach without being challenged. Clara stared at it, unease tightening her chest. That vehicle is not mine, she said. Adrian's expression hardened. It is his. The core pulsed again, and this time the tremor traveled visibly through the fence, humming along the metal wires like a live current. Clara realized in that moment that the conflict unfolding was not theoretical. It was already in motion, layered with alliances she had not consented to and loyalties Adrian could not openly reveal. She met his silver gaze again, searching for deception and finding none. If we both have a problem, she said quietly, then standing on opposite sides of this fence is not solving it. Adrian held her stare, and for the first time since their encounter began, he stepped closer to the boundary rather than away from it, the invisible line between their worlds narrowing by a single deliberate stride. The SUV remained at the edge of the ridge, engine humming low and steady, its dark windows reflecting nothing but trees and sky. Clara felt the air grow denser, as if the forest itself had begun to lean inward. Adrian stepped fully to the fence line now, close enough that she could see the faint tension in his shoulders, the restraint coiled beneath his stillness. "He wants you to proceed," Adrian said quietly, eyes fixed on the vehicle. "The faster you extract, the less stable the core becomes. Instability creates fear. Fear creates leverage." Clara processed the logic quickly. "Leverage over whom?" she asked. "Over your council. Over the investors. Over both worlds." The alarm inside the trailer sounded again, sharper this time. Mark's voice followed. "Clara," she said, calculating quickly, "we could trigger a structural collapse within 72 hours. Not catastrophic, but enough to alter groundwater patterns across several counties." Adrian's eyes shifted to her sharply. "You can slow it." "Not without access to the cavern," she replied. "And not if someone is feeding false extraction simulations into my system." For a long moment, neither spoke. The SUV engine shut off, leaving the clearing in near silence except for the distant hum of equipment and the steady 9-second pulse beneath their feet. Clara made a decision before she fully understood the consequences. She reached down and disengaged the latch on a small maintenance gate built into the fence. The metal clicked open with a sound that felt larger than it should have. Adrian's gaze dropped briefly to the opening, then returned to her face. "This does not make us allies," she said, holding his stare. "It makes us temporary collaborators." A faint, almost imperceptible shift touched his expression, something between respect and warning. "Temporary is sufficient," he replied. From across the clearing, Lucian's posture changed subtly as he registered the opened gate. The core pulsed again, stronger than any previous cycle, and for the first time Clara sensed not just energy but reaction, as if the force beneath the earth recognized that the line dividing two worlds had just been deliberately crossed. The small maintenance gate stood open between them like a quiet floor, stronger than any previous cycle, and this time the vibration lingered an extra second before fading. Adrian felt it through his bones, through lineage older than the treaty itself. He expected resistance, Adrian said quietly. He did not expect cooperation. Clara studied Lucian's distant silhouette, then glanced at Adrian. If he is coordinating with the consortium board, then he has access to internal communications, which means someone on my side is feeding him data. Adrian's gaze remained steady, and someone on mine is feeding him authority. The implications